Welcome to the party, aviation enthusiasts from all over the globe. This is Jamie Beckett with AOPA's Foundation Ambassador in Florida. I've got Kay Sundrum, my good buddy, who does the same darn job out in California, and Pat Brown, who he's going to tell you Texas is the greatest place there is, and it might be. Hey, tonight we're going to talk about non-towered airport operations, and I know that might seem like an odd topic, but it's not. There are about 20,000 airports in the United States. That's a big number, 20,000 just in the United States. What might surprise you is only about 500 have control towers. So that leaves, if my math is correct, something like 19,500 destinations that do not have a control tower. Man, wouldn't it be good if we knew how to function in that airspace? Don't you think, guys, Kay? Wouldn't it be good if we knew what to do when we got there?
Yeah, absolutely. You only got 2.5% that are controlled airports, so I would focus a lot of attention on.
I love it when you do math. I love it when you do math. That's so cool. Eric Pitten's on with us. Hey, Eric, it's good to see you. South Carolina in the house. I would like to encourage anybody who's tuning in tonight, and even if you're watching the replay later, if you have a question that you don't hear us address, please feel free to write us at ambassadors, with an S, at aopa.org. And seriously, you can ask any question on any topic you want, even while we're live tonight. We're talking about non-towered airport ops, but if you want to talk about whether or not Pat is flying a red Cherokee or a red Comanche or a blue Comanche, that may become a topic that you've got to do. So, hey, let me go to Pat and talk a little bit about radio communications, because we talk about this a bit, and we're both a little bit rigid on this, and not without good reason. Are radio communications required at a non-towered airport, or are they just a darn good idea?
No, of course they're not required. You can fly into a non-towered field, no radio, and it happens frequently, especially when you're in rural airports, away in the middle of nowhere. That's not all that uncommon. Certainly not a good idea if you're flying out of a non-towered field, let's say in some place a little bit more crowded, like Houston. Probably not a great idea. And by the way, hello to Mr. and Mrs. Pilot Partner here. They're good friends of mine over in the Hill Country. At any rate, radio communications at non-towered fields are incredibly important, and it's actually one of my pet peeves. As a CFI and a DPE, I hear, as I'm sure you do, horrible examples of non-towered radio communications out there. And I know we're going to get into some specific examples right now. In fact, Martin just posted one. That is my number one.
Oh, yeah. Well,
right there.
This is a common one. We hear it all the time, and it's ironic because we shouldn't hear it at all.
That's correct. AIM 4-1-9 actually calls that out. Paragraph G, I believe, if you want to be specific about it, I think, actually says that particular phrase shouldn't be used under any circumstances, yet you hear it all the time. And when I'm doing rusty pilot seminars, I typically tell the story about flying out of a small airport in Central Texas several years ago with a student, and as we're climbing out, we hear this radio call. This is not a joke. It's Brenham traffic, Phenom 12345. We're 10 miles north inbound the RNAV 16. Any traffic in the area, known or unknown, please advise.
I'm curious about the unknown traffic.
Absolutely true story. And I thought to myself, boy, if I wasn't a professional.
And the pilot assumes that everybody is an instrument-rated pilot and knows exactly what about the RNAV that.
Well, yeah, of course. There's that too, and there's also, I'm at Shuey inbound, or I'm at Josie inbound. Where the heck is Josie? If you're not based at that airport, and if you're not an instrument-rated pilot, you have no idea that might be a fix on an approach somewhere. So, it's little things like that they sound little and people laugh about them. And I understand that. I really do. But at the same time, those little things can be quite big. And if you end up with a smoking hole in the ground because somebody made an improper radio call and it wasn't clear and concise, this ceases being funny.
Hey, Kay, how about the other one we hear a lot is last call. And I don't know where that came from. When I started flying, you never heard that. Now it's constant. Is there any point in saying last call in your estimation?
No, no, absolutely not. In fact, it's just it serves no purpose, and it just ties up the frequency. And what everyone should recognize is that when you're on that common traffic advisory frequency, the C-Tap frequency, it should be used for only two reasons. One is collision avoidance, and then second is airport advisory. So if you're leaving, why bother saying it's your last call? It has nothing to do with collision avoidance or airport advisories.
I just did a safety meeting on this topic up in Sanford, Florida recently, and there were two people in the audience who insisted last call made sense. And the way I explained it is, if you are flying out of a towered airport, one of three things will happen. Either they'll call you and say frequency change approved, or you'll call them and say, can I have a frequency change? Or you'll just leave the area. But there is no, even in a towered airport, there's no reason to say, okay, thanks, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, I'm going to move on. They kind of figured that. You're going 100 miles an hour in the other direction. We got it.
So Robin Cole says, okay, so what's the big deal with the request for aircraft to be asked to report their presence? And here's the problem, Robin. So let's say that you're 10 miles out coming into an airport and you say West Houston traffic, Skylane 12345 is 10 miles to the west, inbound landing, any traffic in the area, please advise. Well, first of all, if nobody answers, what do you really know? Really nothing. If 3 or 4 or 5 people try to be good Samaritans answer, and even if it's to say nobody's there that we know of, what do you really know? You really don't know anything, because if you have 4 or 5 or even 2 people trying to answer at the same time, what do you get? You get a bunch of squealing like, a bunch of girls at a Justin Bieber concert. That's what it sounds like in your headset. So what do you know? Nothing. So if you have people monitoring the radio in a non-tower traffic pattern, and they're not making radio calls, just the fact that you are reporting coming inbound will spur somebody, because they don't want you to hit them any more than they want to hit you. It will spur somebody in the traffic pattern to report their position. And if you absolutely positively cannot stop yourself from keying the mic and asking about any traffic in the pattern, then make a call to the Unicom. Sometimes Unicoms are monitored, sometimes they're not. But if you absolutely positively have to make that radio call, then you could call West Houston Unicom, Cessna 12345, we're 10 miles to the west. Do you have any traffic reported in the pattern? And that way, one person to whom you are directing this radio call, assuming that it's a monitored frequency, will answer you, you hope. But if nobody answers again, you're no worse off than you are. And if you're simply monitoring the frequency as you're coming in, oftentimes you'll hear people making good radio calls that they're turning crosswind or turning downwind or what have you. So it's just a useless radio call. And AIM specifically says, 4-1-9 specifically says, don't use it. It's not a proper radio call. In fact, the quote in the book says, and should not be used under any circumstances.
I'll actually add to that. Go ahead, Kay. You go, then I'll go.
I'll add one other thing, is that you should be monitoring that C-Tap well ahead of time from entering the pattern. And that's just good practice, even if you're not even landing at that airport. Anytime you're flying near a non-towered airport, it's good to monitor the C-Tap and just know what's going on, especially if you're going to transition even above the airspace. Because again, it goes back to avoiding a mid-air collision, and you want to go with the flow.
I was going to add that was one of my 2 points, Kay. Yeah, use your pilot superpower and listen a good 15, 20 miles out, and you'll have a mental image of what's happening there. Is somebody doing pattern work? Are there just some transients flying in or out? The other thing is, we're at a non-towered airport, we're generally using a shared frequency. Pat and I are both at non-towered airports, both use the same frequency. Now, we're 800 miles apart, so that's not an issue. But here locally, and I mean in Florida, there's an airport on the East Coast, there's an airport on the West Coast, there's an airport north of me. There's 6 airports within about a 60-mile range that when you're in the pattern, you can hear them because it's flat here. When you're making that call, you've blanked out the bandwidth for all those airports. Nobody else can make a call. So it's just noise. It's just something we don't have to talk about. And Eric Pittman, the famous Eric Pittman, who we love very, very much, he says, I don't understand the real difference between Unicom and C-Tap, especially because they're the same frequencies sometimes. Kay, you want to tackle that one?
You're right. And you're right. There are sometimes the same frequencies, sometimes they're not. So common traffic advisory frequencies, what the pilots are using to report their position. Whereas a Unicom is someone sitting on the ground, and they will give you some advisors if you ask for it. And there's actually no formal phraseology that Unicom operators have to use, but you can go ahead and chat with them, and you can ask them for traffic advisories at 20 miles out. And they, if they have the time and the heart to do so, they'll get on there and they'll give you some advisories, but they are just that, advisories.
Yeah. Those two things from a practical standpoint, there's not much difference. But for example, if you're going into a towered field, the tower frequency may be considered C-Tap when the tower closes for the night, for example, and there may be a Unicom frequency that's shown there. And typically, so I like your advertisement there in your glass there, Jamie.
I was doing a 3D thing. I hope that came off.
It will close, but epic fail. But oftentimes, if you're flying into a towered field, one that has an FBO, and most of them will, there'll be a Unicom frequency where you can call the FBO, for example, when you're some miles out to make sure your rental car is ready, or that you've got a quick turn if you'd like some gasoline, or a push back into your hangar or something like that. Mm-hmm. For practical purposes, Unicom and C-Tap we use them interchangeably. They're not exactly the same thing, but practically speaking, they are.
I'd like to go to the question, too, from Thomas Robertson, who asks a very reasonable question. I've used this. Where can I look up a specific accident in the Ntsb records? There's a lot of education to be had there. And, Thomas, basically, you can go to the Ntsb website, and there is a request tab. And you go and you have to fill in some information if you're looking for a specific accident, or you can just go to the big, huge list. I can't remember the year it cuts off, but it's not that far back. I mean, it doesn't go to the 60s. I mean, you have to go request that specially. But, yeah, you can look up Ntsb records. You can find out what the cause was, what the finding was. It's actually kind of interesting reading. Wouldn't you agree? Both of you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, even more, I think more interesting is the Air Safety Institute's accident case studies. Now, they don't have that on all the accidents, obviously, but they do on several. And you can just go onto the AOPA website and type in accident case studies, and you'll see a whole bunch with videos and analysis, and you learn a lot. You learn a lot from those.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about one other radio thing before we go on, and it is a pet peeve for me. I occasionally hear people, Kay, who are leaving the hangar, taxiing to the fuel pump, or they're taxiing from the fuel pump over to the restaurant, and they make a very long radio call about this. Is there any real reason to be making a call that you're taxiing around the ramp or the hangars or anything where you're not coming anywhere near the runway?
Absolutely not. It just ties up the frequency, and it doesn't serve any purpose for anyone. So I would be short and sweet, and communicate as if you are operating out of Los Angeles International Airport. All right, we're pilots, we're professional. We want to be short and sweet, and none of the unnecessary radio calls, because it just ties up the frequency.
Yeah.
And we've got Mike Robert here with a very interesting question, because we have all owned aircraft. And he's saying, so own or rent? What's the spark behind the massive price jumps in Cessna 172s? Pat, you just recently purchased a Cessna, and it's not just the 172. There's a whole bunch of airplanes where the prices have gone up substantially in the used market. What do you personally attribute that to, young man?
Oh, hey, thank you for the compliment. Well, look, we have an increase in flight training. I just, from my own DP activity, I see an increase around here in flight training. We've got an aging fleet, airplanes that are being retired. They have to be replaced. Flight schools can't afford $500,000 for a brand new Cessna 172, so they're looking for the used market. There is some amount of export happening on some of these airplanes because of the demand for them overseas. That it's a supply and demand thing. You've got, when COVID hit, it seemed to, I don't know what happened, but it seemed to spark. It's like, something, I don't know how much time we've got left on this planet. Let's go buy an airplane. And there's a lot of people that are buying airplanes, and it's the basic supply and demand thing. Same thing's happening in housing prices, but it's the same thing in airplanes.
You make a good point. COVID made a lot of people afraid of airline travel, but they still want to travel. And for those who have the ability to fly an airplane, and frankly, most people do if they really want to, general aviation has spiked. Back to the radio thing for a minute, and I like this question. Ken Vard, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Ken. How about making a radio call from the fuel pump to the runway? Required or recommended? I'm going to say no, it's not required or recommended. You can taxi around at will because you're at a non-towered airport, but hold short of the hold short line. Make your first call when you're ready to cross that line and depart, but you don't have to tell people what you're doing on the ground because you're not interfering with anybody landing or taking off. And frankly, if all three of us are taxiing down different taxiways to the same intersection, we can see that. We'll figure it out. And if we have to, we'll call up, say, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You go first. I'll go behind you. And that works.
It's common.
The only exception to that is if there's, if you see somebody else coming, and there's not enough room for both of you, then obviously tell on the frequency, what your intentions are, so that you both don't end up getting into a position where somebody has to shut down and then push back to get out of the other person's way.
Phrase though. Okay, the whole point is to self-announce your intentions if they're going to interact with other people in some way. Certainly when we're going to take flight or land, that possibility exists. But if we don't see somebody in our way, somebody who's blocking something, it's okay to just taxi out there. And if we do see somebody, self-announce. You can talk to them. You see them right over there. Just say, hey, Red Comanche, I'm doing this. What are you thinking? And we're all good.
Yeah. And by the way, it's pronounced Ken Viard, and Ken and Melissa are Mr. and Mrs. Pilot Partner from earlier on in the chat.
Well, I sincerely apologize, Mr. and Mrs. Viard, for getting that wrong, and I will have somebody admonish me later so that I feel really bad about it. Hey, let's talk about traffic patterns. There is a persistent belief in the pilot population that a non-towered airport is an uncontrolled airport. I disagree with this.
No, not at all.
There's actually a regulation, isn't there, Pat? I mean, it's not the aim. It's not a recommendation. There's an actual regulation that says you will fly the appropriate pattern at this airport.
Yeah, 91.126 is the one that says all turns shall be made to the left in the traffic pattern, unless otherwise stated. And a non-towered airport actually can choose its own traffic pattern. So a non-towered field may say, for example, look, let's be good neighbors and not have people flying at 1,000 feet AGL over a populated shopping center. So we're going to put the traffic pattern on the other side of the airport. It's perfectly legal, perfectly normal. There's a couple of airports here in the Houston area that have right-hand traffic for specifically that reason. But unless otherwise specified, 91.126 specifically says that all turns shall be made to the left. Now, it's interesting that as you're entering the traffic pattern from a 45 degree, you're actually making a right-hand turn to enter the traffic pattern. And if you read the FAA's advisory circulars, essentially what they're saying is all turns should be made to the left, except we're going to say this one is okay to make to the right. That's kind of what the ACs say. So, but all turns should be made to the right. It also says that rotor wing aircraft are to avoid fixed wing aircraft. It doesn't actually say for them to fly opposite direction traffic. All that's common for them to do. It actually just says they shall avoid fixed wing traffic, and oftentimes it's just by flying significantly lower.
I like that. Hey, we've got a follow-up from Mike Robert on the buying an airplane question, which is a very valid question, and I am currently buying an airplane, Mike. Mike says, should I wait 2 to 3 years before buying? And, I don't think any of us can answer that question, Mike, because we don't know your age or what you intend to do with the plane or your financial capacity or any of that stuff. I would not wait because I thought the economy was going to change or there would be regulatory changes. If you want to own an airplane, own an airplane. I'm buying my 8th or 9th airplane. I've never regretted owning an airplane. It is absolutely fantastic. I love being able to go fly the airplane I want, when I want, and put what I want in the panel. Pat, you just did that, didn't you? You just added some to a panel you just bought.
Yeah, I had a Cirrus for years and a partnership, and I love the airplane, but I really wanted something just on my own that my wife and I could enjoy, just the two of us. So we bought a Cessna 182. Paid a premium for it. I have no doubt about that. Probably $15,000 more than we would have paid 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. But part of the purchase price included a Garmin 750 XI and a whole bunch of other toys in the instrument panel that make that airplane a one sweet and well-equipped Cessna 182. As other than the glass panel that you might get in a brand new 182, it's as well-equipped as any 182 you'll find in the country now. But I paid a premium for it at 2,000 hours total time on the airframe and 900 hours on the engine. It was worth it. So you just bite your tongue and write the check.
A lot of owners do. Oh, sorry, go ahead, JB.
No.
A lot of owners do feel that the aircraft can be appreciable assets depending on, what you get and how you maintain it, and whether you're keeping up with the times. And the technology, we've come a long way, technology in the cockpit, and these airplanes that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, it might seem like, wow, it's 50 years old. I'd never get into a car that's 50 years old, but that's not the case with an airplane.
Not at all.
If it's kept airworthy, and then if you're keeping up with the technology, then it really is an appreciable asset.
I will tell you, I love the panel in the airplane I'm buying. It's part of the reason I'm buying it. I really like it. It's very clean. It's glass. But I did notice that there's a company that's selling chemtrail switches that you can add. And I'm really thinking of putting a chemtrail on and off switch on the deck. I just like that. Hey, let's talk just for a moment about straight-in approaches, because they're not illegal. I mean, you can do a straight-in approach, and of course, an instrument approach is a straight-in approach. Do either of you have a thought on, because my perspective is, while it's legal, you're not in the pattern. You do not have the right of way. The guy on base, or I'm sorry, Kay, the individual who may be male or female, we don't know. The individual on base has right of way over the straight-in traffic. And that's even true if you're on an instrument flight plan. Does either of you have a strong feeling one way or the other on this that you would like to share with our audience?
Okay, ladies first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I strongly prefer people enter in on the 45 to death. If it's a left downwind, then a left 45, a right pattern, then a right 45. And this way, you're able to configure the airplane better. And exactly where you are, where other traffic is, and people can see you better too when you're in the pattern than when you're on a 5-mile final. Even with the airplanes, we used to have those bright yellow birds, right? Yeah. It's still hard, and on a hazy day, they're not going to see you until you get really close, and then there is a potential for, or a higher potential for mid-air collision. But if you're coming in on the pattern and you do it properly, which means you enter midfield on the pattern at the pattern altitude. That's not when you're coming down and descending. You're entering the pattern midfield, and you're at the TPA, traffic pattern altitude. And then you start focusing on configuring the airplane. What do you need for your flaps? What is the speed? And then the distance from the runway. And so if you're flying a Cessna, you want to put that runway, we say, halfway up the strut. And that gives you the distance, horizontal distance from the runway. You can do that if you're on downwind. You can't do that if you're on a 5-mile final. And so then you know when to turn base, look 45 degrees, then again, configure the airplane, second notch a flap, and it all depends on what airplane you're in. But the bottom line is you just have a better feel for the airplane configuration, and that energy management, in my opinion, is a lot easier. And by energy management, I mean speed management. That is a lot easier if you're in a pattern than coming in on a long final.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kay. The other thing is that if you're going to fly straight in, as Jamie said, you don't have the right of way over somebody that's in the traffic pattern, and typically the lower of the two aircraft have the right of way anyway. But if you're practicing an instrument approach, which is generally by definition a straight-in approach, what I have always instructed my students to do, and what I do myself when I'm practicing straight-in approaches, GPS approaches, for example, at a non-towered field, I'll report at the final approach fix, but I don't report the name of the fix. I'll report a mileage position from the airport, straight into runway 15, a full stop or a short or a go around. But point is, I'll say traffic permitting. And if the radio frequency isn't too crowded, I'll say we'll give way to any traffic in the pattern. Something to let folks know that I don't expect them to extend their downwind 4, 5, 6 miles just so that I can come in just because I can. Just being a good neighbor, I think. So philosophically, I don't like straight-in approaches, but they're unavoidable in some cases. And if you're going to do it, then at least let people know that you don't expect them to give way to you just because you're too lazy to fly a traffic pattern. And
I had a CFII applicant at one of the big schools talk to me after a safety presentation, and they said, I'm about to go on my double I ride, and we're going to have to do approaches. And if I'm doing an approach in the airport they were going to be at, it's very busy. And they said, and I see somebody on base, what do I do? And I just said, well, if you were in actual and you broke out at 1200 and there was somebody on base in front of you, what would you do? And they said, I'd go missed. Well, that's what you do on your check ride then, because that's the safe thing to do. You don't just say, I'm on an instrument approach, so I'm just barreling through on whatever. No. By the way, I would like to point out the very important comment from Mike Robert here, who says, I'm going to win that AOPA Grumman Tiger. Who wants to fly in it with me first? This is extraordinarily gracious, Mike, and I appreciate it. But for those who aren't in the running, I think it behooves us to mention anybody can get in on the Aopa Sweepstakes to win that remarkable Grumman Tiger. And now it's very complex. You're going to need a pen for this. What you have to do is join Aopa as a member. That's all. And you're automatically entered. And by the way, if you join and do automatic renewal, you get 5 extra entries. And it is a nice plane. And I realize that Mike is slated to win it, apparently, from his perspective. Just from your perspective, Mike. It's possible somebody else might win it, but there will be another one coming around after that. So be aware of it, because it is an awesome plane, and they always are, whether they're a Super Cub on amphibious floats or this RV or any one of the number of things we've done. I just wish we could win them.
And Mike, let me tell you, if you need somebody to check you out in it, I've got about 500 hours in Tigers.
There you go. Does he live in your neighborhood, Pat?
I have no idea.
Well, it would be worth traveling to Pat's neighborhood. It's very nice in West Houston. Oh, man. Well, I appreciate you getting into all this stuff. That IFR thing is a real question, because we do, at non-towered airports, have a mix of traffic. And there could be corporate jets coming in and out of non-towered airports. There could be UPS or FedEx caravans flying in and out. Pat, how do we think about approaching that non-towered airport as VFR traffic, knowing IFR traffic might be there, or as IFR traffic, assuming VFR traffic will probably be in the pattern?
Well, boy, that's just not
Welcome
an easy.
to the hot seat, Pat.
Yeah, that's not an easy question. We have only 30 minutes left to go. Well, first of all, monitoring the C-Tap or the Unicom, as the case may be, that's number one. You want to get a good idea of what's the lay of the land, so to speak, on the airport that you're approaching. If you can listen to it 10 miles out, that's great. If you're on an IFR flight plan, even in clear visibility, unlimited conditions, that may not be a possibility unless you cancel IFR and leave the frequency. But again, oftentimes ATC will say advise when the airport's in sight. As soon as you do, they're going to say advise canceling IFR, some phraseology to that extent. Anyway, you can get off IFR and do that. But listen as far out as you feel comfortable doing, get the lay of the land. You may have to do a 360 a few miles away from the airport. if you've got a whole bunch of airplanes in the traffic pattern and you aren't sure where they are, sometimes it's better just to bail out or not put yourself into that position until the dust settles a little bit. I've had to do that before. I've had students that have had to do that. I've been on check rides when West Houston Airport's a very, very busy non-towered field. And I've been on check rides where the applicant has said, I'm just not sure where everybody is. We're gonna head away from the airport for a few minutes to listen, and they re-enter the traffic pattern. And, you know, from my standpoint, that is great aeronautical decision making.
I was going to ask that as a follow-up. That you're a designated pilot examiner. This is a check ride. That's not a bust. That's good piloting.
It's great pilotage. That can cover a multitude of ills or sins if somebody really shows exceptional aeronautical decision making and things like that. Another thing to consider is, what direction are you entering the traffic pattern from, or grammatically speaking, from what direction are you entering the traffic pattern? If you're coming in from the wrong side of the field, let's say you've got a north-south runway, you're coming in from the east, that's easy. That's a 45-degree entry to the downwind leg. But what if you're coming in from the west? Well, there's probably a dozen different ways that you can enter the traffic pattern from I'll call it the wrong side of the field. But the Chapter 7 of the Airplane Flying Handbook specifically lists two. One of them is the teardrop entry to the downwind leg. We talk about this in Rusty Pilot. And as if on cue, Donnie puts the graphic up.
Donnie's an okay guy.
He's amazing. But take a look very carefully at what that says. That says overfly the field 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern. Well, the highest traffic pattern at a non-towered field is 1,500 feet AGL, because twins and turbines typically fly 1,500 feet. So 500 feet above that is 2,000 feet. Then it says go 2 miles beyond the downwind leg. How far out is the downwind leg? Oftentimes, it's anywhere between about a half a mile and a mile from the field. So we're talking about going out from the airport at 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern altitude, 2,000 feet above AGL, and then going out at least I would say 3 miles before you start at that point the descending turn back in. So essentially, you're overflying the field, flying away from the traffic pattern and the terminal area before you circle back. And what makes this thing so dangerous is those people that enter the traffic pattern at traffic pattern altitude and start that teardrop turn just after they cross the center line of the runway, or just after they cross the downwind leg. And you can imagine that you're putting yourself in a potential conflict situation there. It's potentially the most dangerous way to enter the traffic pattern. So I'm doing a lot of talking here, Guy. What are you guys' thoughts about?
No, you're right. You've got to think in 3D. You've got to, you're entering the traffic pattern, which means you have to cross over midfield and get well away from the airport, then descend and come back. And you're exactly right. And it leads right into Mike Roberts' question. Was the old quote-unquote rule of all traffic pattern altitudes being the standard 1,000 feet above airport elevation just abandoned? I don't think it was just abandoned, but they're published. I mean, it's in what used to be called the AFD, now is the chart supplement, but
right.
Traffic pattern altitudes are published, and as Pat says, and there's a great example of one, that's got three different 800 feet for helicopters, 1,000 feet for single and light twins, 1,500 feet for large twins and jets. So to your point, Pat, if I'm passing over that airport to get to the other side, I need to be 2,000 feet or higher. And if the ceiling doesn't allow that, then I have to fly all the way around and just get well out of the way. But I don't want to get midfield and then start descending, because I'm descending into the downwind.
And you bring up a good point there too, Jamie, because there are challenges when you say fly all the way around. You're implying either, again, on a north-south airport runway, you're talking about maybe flying all the way around the north side or flying all the way around the south side. And if you're flying all the way around, let's say they're landing to the south, you fly around the north side, you're putting yourself in potential conflict for people that might be flying a straight-in practice instrument approach.
Yep. So you've got to be a ways out.
Yeah, and if you're flying a straight-out departure from the airport and somebody has skirted around the other way, there's a possibility then for a conflict between that person that's entering that way extended crosswind for somebody that's climbing out. So, you know,
keep in mind that when you do fly out and you're entering that teardrop, you have to monitor what everybody else is doing. And there's been a number of occasions where I've had to do 360s. Just because there wasn't proper separation. And okay, you did the teardrop, but that doesn't give you the right to enter right at that time.
No,
you still have to monitor.
Exactly right.
You might have to make a 360. You might have to make 2 360s, maybe even 3. Yeah.
Well,
and whatever it takes to get that sequence in.
That 360 at a standard rate is a valuable thing because that gives everybody 2 minutes to move along, get out of the way, and then we come back and, like you say, do it again if need be. But it's all about thinking.
A lot can happen in 2 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And also keep in mind that there will be faster airplanes and slower airplanes. And I'm not talking about, you know, turbine and, you know, and reciprocating. I'm referring to a Skyhawk and a Cirrus, for example. Yeah. So the Cirrus is going to guarantee you is going to make a wider pattern. And so you don't want to look at just people directly in front of you. You also want to look over to the side because if they're faster, they're going to be wider. But if you are flying in a, say, 172 or Piper, then you really want to keep your, if it's a Skyhawk, the runway right on the middle of your strut. And that gives you a good distance from how far from the runway.
Yeah, our airport is a very, very busy non-towered field. Jamie knows because he's flown out of there. But it's an interesting mix of everything from 150s and 152s to 172s, 182s, a whole raft of the Piper products. We have several Pilatuses or perhaps Pilati, I think. Pilati, that are based there. We've got probably half a dozen King Airs that are based there. We've got a couple of Citations that are based there. So at any given time, you could. And most of those airplanes typically will do straight-in approaches, and they're pretty good about announcing their relative position to the airport as they come straight in. Not all of them do. But we have a real interesting mix of a lot of different airplanes, and fortunately, folks generally are pretty good about the radio calls that they make, and as a result, the airport has an excellent safety record. So it really is all about communications. You know, the other way that you can enter the traffic pattern according to Chapter 7 of the Airplane Flying Handbook is midfield downwind, and then just simply join the downwind leg as it says here. And in this case, you're entering the traffic pattern at traffic pattern altitude directly above the runway, like the illustration shows, and joining the downwind at midfield. And of course, you're supposed to give way to any of the traffic that you might know coming in on the 45 to the downwind from the, in this case, the right-hand side of the airport in this illustration. So, you know, there are a couple of different ways that the Airplane Flying Handbook, which is an FAA-written publication, recognizes appropriate ways to enter the traffic pattern. But, you know, as with any other thing, this is recommended. It's not necessarily regulatory in nature, and common sense has to rule the day. You know, you can be right and you can be dead right, as the saying goes. And you know, I don't care who wins or loses. I just don't want to have a tie, right? Yeah.
Donnie, if you can put that graphic up for a second, I'd like to make one point using it, and then I'm going to come to Kay with a question. You'll notice both this method and the other where you're above the traffic pattern altitude and you do the teardrop entry, you cross over at midfield. That's because that's the one place you're not going to have a conflict with aircraft that are taking off or landing. You're at midfield. It's also the reason when you do take off, you shouldn't be making a turn until you pass the departure end of the runway. It's a personal pet peeve of mine where people break ground, get to 100 feet, and turn. Now you're turning into the downwind or into the upwind. That's not great. Thank you very much, Donnie. I appreciate that.
Let's talk a little bit about that too, Jamie, because if you take a look again at AIM 4-3-3 and Chapter 7 of the Airplane Flying Handbook and Advisory Circular 90-66B, all of
You're
those.
saying there's reference material, Pat.
There's reference materials, and lots of it. And I find this interesting, and we talked a little bit about this in Rusty Pilot, but I find it really interesting. There's lots of guidance about how to enter the traffic pattern. There's lots of guidance about how to conduct yourself when you're in the traffic pattern. That is, for example, your flying circuits or working pattern work. AIM says very clearly, turn crosswind within 300 feet of traffic pattern altitude. So at our airport with an MSL of 100 feet, basically that's 800 feet indicated would be when you would turn crosswind remaining in the traffic pattern. Chapter 7 also says, as does AIM, Chapter 7 and AIM also say if you're going to leave the traffic pattern, let's say at a left-hand turn airport, you climb to 1,000 feet and then make a 45-degree turn to the left. Thank you, Donnie, for putting that up. A 45-degree turn to the left. If you're going to be going straight out, you just keep on going. Basically, climb to 1,000 feet and then just keep on going. But it's strangely quiet about how to depart the traffic pattern if you're going in the opposite direction. So let's say you're at a left-hand traffic pattern, but you want to turn to the right, which is a very common thing. It happens all the time at our airport. And I can't find anywhere that there's any definitive guidance on that. So when I'm doing a debrief after a check ride, especially if somebody has made an opposite turn out of the traffic pattern at 700 or 800 feet, thinking that they're within 300 feet of traffic pattern altitude, that's not really what's intended there. They really should be going straight out. So I basically tell them, look, common sense really has to prevail here. AIM says go out, just keep on going straight out. Basically climb to 1,000 feet, either make a left-hand 45 or keep going straight. If you want to make a right-hand turn, keep going straight, keep climbing, assuming you can do so with airspace restrictions, things like that, until you feel like you're a comfortable and safe distance away from the airport, and then make your right turn out on course. That's the best that I can do in terms of offering somebody some suggestions.
You know, I go with the same thing, and I'm about to come to UK. I just figure if I'm going to turn right at a left-hand pattern, or if I want to go north when the runway's facing south, I'll fly the pattern to the north and then depart, or I'll just fly until I'm not in the pattern anymore. Yeah. And now I can do what I want. And because I am in golf or echo airspace, I've got a lot of flexibility. Kay, you've been silent for far too long, and your brain is way too big to allow that to happen. So let's touch on this. Pat has delved into, there's reference material. But it's not just on the pattern. There are other things like noise abatement, and there is a regulation that says we're supposed to be familiar with all information, just not the little nuggets we want. Can you give me an example of, what they're talking about? How do I know before I get to your airport, where I've never been, how I'm expected to conduct myself on the way in and out?
So what you should do, things before you go, is you should make a mental trip around the traffic pattern to review all the procedures and all the techniques. You should know the communication frequencies and, standard, non-standard, the flight operation, not just for your airplane, but also helicopters, gliders, parachuters, everybody who's going to be there. And that airport facility directory that we used to call it, now it's called chart supplement, is really important. But in addition to, here's an example right here, but in addition to looking at this, you want to know if there's any special procedures in your area. And I'm going to pull up where I'm based at. I'm based at Palomar Airport, just north of San Diego. And they got this great flyer here about noise abatement procedure, because do you see all the yellow here? That is all the noise sensitive area. All right. And what I like about this is voluntary noise abatement procedure, but if we want to keep operating out of airports like this, we really need to be in compliance with this. And they did a great job with this flyer, where you can see all the red is the suggested arrival routes. The so what color is that? Purple. I guess purple is the suggested departure. And then the green is the traffic pattern, and it is a non-standard, and it happens to be 1,500, even though our elevation here is only 330. If you come flying in, adding that 1,000 and come in at 1,300, you're going to upset a lot of people. They really don't want you to be below 1,500. And so you need to get your hands on something like this. And it doesn't have to be paper. This is available electronically. Go to the airport website and download this. Go through this. And if you don't really want the pictures and you want the text, they usually give that to you on the back. And then there's a whole bunch of other information, frequencies and hotspots. And now those are all in the chart supplement, but the special procedures are not. And so you want to take a look at this and you want to mentally fly that pattern. I want to show you one other one, because I know not everybody is in Southern California, may never have been to Oceanside, but take a look at this. Does that look like a standard procedure to you? That
Wow.
Yellow is what the traffic pattern is. So when you're departing out of Oceanside, you are supposed to follow the riverbed. That's where that first airplane is. And then go all the way to the shoreline and then turn your crosswind there. Then you proceed, and do you see the pink line, people coming in? They're supposed to go to that water tower and then enter 45. But take a look at the purple right above it. That is Camp Pendleton. Do you see how close it is?
Yeah,
That's right.
that's amazing.
So, and this is at 1,000 feet. And so, and look at all the red. So that is highly, highly sensitive area.
What I like about this, though, and it's a great tool, those landmarks are really good landmarks. I mean, a
Yes.
shoreline's not hard to find. That water tower is going to be, I'm
very
visually
prominent.
looking for that. That's the
That's
kind
right.
of stuff that's really helpful.
And then look, it even says the church, avoid, the park, avoid, the schools, avoid. And we really need to avoid those areas, because we have this wonderful freedom to fly here in this beautiful country that a lot of other places in the world don't have. And if we're not compliant with these kind of things, we're going to lose that freedom. And if it's taken away from us, we're not going to get it back. So this is where you have to pay attention to these sort of procedures. And I have a bunch of these sort of flyers. You all do. They're online. You just have to go and download it. Now, when I go to the airport, I usually grab a bunch and I give it to my students, and I like to have them because it is nice to have these colored copies. But I want you to look for it online and make that mental trip. And okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is a checkpoint I'm going to look for. These are the frequencies I'm going to need, and write it down ahead of time.
Yeah, nothing beats that local knowledge. That's for sure. And if you're flying into an airport that let's just say a non-towered airport, because oftentimes that's going to be the case, and it may be worth making a telephone call to that local airport, the airport manager, the FBO, whatever the case may be, and ask if there are any special procedures that are known essentially to the locals that may not be in the chart supplement, because that's very possible that at our airport, if you're taking off to the north, we've got a golf course and a residential area directly to the north of the airport, and a shopping center slightly to the west of it. And the actual traffic pattern says the recommendation is to make about a 30-degree turn to the left when you get to about 500 feet to avoid overflying the residential area. It's sort of a non-standard traffic pattern in the fact that we have to make that dog leg. And it's non-regulatory, and it's not in the chart supplement.
You know, that
A lot of
brings
times
us
the
all
non-standard-
into I'm sorry, go ahead, Kate.
A lot of times a non-standard it's not just noise abatement, it's also because of obstacles and terrain. And I got a lot of that around here. And you might see something, small. This is a small little obstacle symbol on the chart, but when you're on the ground and you're taking off, and if you don't know exactly where that is, it's going to come as a big surprise. And so this is where you need to, chair fly that arrival and that departure.
Yes.
And then take advantage of all the local knowledge. And like Pat said, call up. If you were to call Oceanside, they would be delighted to give you this information.
And it all comes back to being a good neighbor. We do something that a very, very small percentage of the public does. The vast majority, 99.8, literally 99.8% of the general public doesn't fly. And many of them find airplane noise upsetting. Many of them think airplanes are dangerous, which is statistically not the case. But if we can learn to seek out those noise abatement procedures, know before we get to our destination that there's a right-hand pattern, and why? Is it to protect me from the towers on the ridgeline, or is it because there's residential housing there and they don't like it? You know, but if we can be a good neighbor, if we can take that seriously, you know, we do protect that freedom to fly. We're not generating complaints, which the airport manager doesn't like. And to Pat's point, not only can you call the airport manager, you can call the flight school. You can call the EAA chapter and talk to somebody. Hey, I'm flying to your airport and I've never been there before. Are there any special procedures I should know about? Are there any particularly good landmarks? You know, if someone were to get crazy enough to search YouTube, they would find about a half-an-hour video that Pat and I did when I was departing West Houston, because West Houston is a non-towered airport. Cakewalk, one runway, same frequency as my home airport. So simple, except I have to turn left to the east, and there's 2 Bravo airspaces I have to fly through right downtown. Why not talk to a local and say, what's the preferred way to do this? Now, luckily, Pat pointed out to me, there's about a 27-lane highway they can do as a reference point. But you know what? Seriously, that's true everywhere you go, whether you're at Palomar, whether you're here in Florida, where we've got Orlando and Tampa Bravos and a whole lot of military operating areas and restricted areas. Talk to a local, and you don't have to be there personally. You can do it on the phone. You can do it by email. You can go look up the charts on the airports. But, man, you can make your life a lot easier and not get that call from ATC that says, let me know when you have time. I have a phone number for you to copy.
So here's one. What if the airport that you used to fly, or that you fly out of all the time, changed its name a year or 2 ago?
Yeah.
And you're still calling it by the old name. And there's an example here in the greater Houston area where we went to lunch that day, actually, Jamie. It used to be called Brazoria County Airport. Several years ago, it got changed to Texas Gulf Coast Regional. Now, Brazoria County is a whole lot easier to say Texas Gulf Coast Regional, but some of the old timers, look who's talking, call it Brazoria County. But for those that are relatively new to the area or aren't familiar with the history of that airport, they have no clue when somebody says, I'm 10 miles north from Brazoria County inbound landing. So being careful to call the airport by its proper name is important, wouldn't you say?
It's not just that. It's any terminology. And we're going to lead into Mike Roberts' question about being a rusty pilot. I had a student once who wasn't really a student. He was a rusty pilot long before AOPA did rusty pilot program. He hadn't flown in 17 years, and he was flying with me to get up to speed, but he kept using old terminology. And he called VORs, and I kept trying to get him to call it a VOR, and he kept calling it an Omni. And one day we were flying into Hartford, Connecticut, and he called in and he said he was over the Omni, and the ATC called back and said, sir, I have no idea where the Armory is. Can you do better? It's like, you got to use the terminology they expect. Which brings us to Mike Roberts. What's the best way a rusty pilot like me can get my confidence I had at 16 in my 152, not thinking twice about doing spins and power on stalls?
Oh, okay? That's an easy.
I'll bet you're going to go along with me and say, start flying with a CFI, work up your competence level, work up your confidence level, and then take it from there. And if you want to be aerobatic, get training in aerobatics. But that's pretty much what we would all recommend, don't you think?
Absolutely. You know what? I'll share my story that I used to have an aversion to spins when I was training as a private pilot and as an instrument pilot, as a commercial pilot. I had never done a spin. And it wasn't until I pursued my CFI certificate where it's required that you demonstrate knowledge of spins and recovery. And that I just thought, all right, I really do want to be a CFI. I have to do this. And so what did I do? I went and I trained with Rich Stoll, who is just he's a genius in upset training, which is, putting you in upset situations in a controlled environment so you know how to recover from it. And then if you ever find yourself in that situation, you know exactly what to do. I did that, and it just eliminated my fears, and it's actually a pretty slow maneuver. And now I enjoy it.
Yeah, and if you want to get into that, it is about doing it with somebody who does it well. You know, you've got your guy out there. I have right here in town, Tim Preston of Preston Aviation. He's got a Citabria and a Stearman, and he does tail dragger training in those. And I did my flight review with him in the Stearman last year. And and that's the thing, you can have fun. This doesn't have to be a challenge. But if you're a prospective CFI, or if you're a private pilot who wants to get comfortable with unusual attitudes or spins, you can go do it in a Stearman. And it's an enormous amount of fun, and you learn a lot, and you have a talented pilot who does this every day with you. So you're in great shape. Pat, what's your thought on this topic?
Well, I would say the best way to regain that confidence, thinking twice about doing spins and power on stalls, is to go out and do spins and power on stalls.
Not solo, though.
With an instructor who is comfortable with doing spins and power on stalls. There's no substitute for just desensitizing yourself to to those. I remember the first time I did a spin in a decathlon after I had been doing spins and Citabrias forever, and the first time I did a spin in a decathlon, that airplane, when it pitches over, it actually feels for a second like it's going to go inverted. Citabria doesn't do that. And I remember the first time feeling that of, oh my God, what's happening here? But when you do it enough, it'd be, oh, okay, well, that's just normal. And there's nothing abnormal about going up and doing spins. That's not an abnormal maneuver. So that's the best way to do it. Just go up and do it. So.
Well, and as Kay said, the thing that surprised me when I did them for first time was for CFI training. It's a requirement, as you say. It's not nearly as exciting as you think it's going to be. I mean, there's different airplanes. Some are more exciting than others. But, you know, if you're in a 152 or something like people normally do spins in, it's actually remarkably comfortable. The world is spinning around, but you don't feel like you are. It's pretty great.
If you really want something, if you want something scary, but you really want to scare yourself in an airplane, go fly with a 7-hour primary student teaching them landings.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
That'll get your heart rate up.
That's exciting.
We've got about a minute and a half left before Donnie cuts us off because he is very rigid. Kay, you got anything you want to share with the audience about the wonders of California, the spectacularity of a Cirrus SR20, whatever makes you happy?
Well, I just want to emphasize to the audience here, ask questions and be really, familiar, because it's the familiarity is what breeds the comfort and the confidence. And so if you're not familiar with communications, or you're not familiar with the Bravo airspace here in Southern California, then just ask questions and be real familiar before going up.
Excellent. Pat, what would you like to share as a parting message to folks?
One other pet peeve. I'm taking the active. Where are you taking it? When are you going to bring it back? I'm going to need it in a minute. All kidding aside, taking the active tells me nothing as a pilot coming into an airport, especially if there's more than one runway at that non-towered field. And by the way, there's no such thing. If you read the advisory circular 90-66B, it tells you there's no such thing as an active runway at a non-towered field. It's the runway in use. So if you're saying I'm clear of the active or I'm taking the active, and somebody's coming into land, listening to the AWOS or the ASOS, and the wind is such that either runway could potentially be in use, you're not doing your fellow pilots any good. So I'm departing runway 15, or I'm taking off runway 15, or if you must say that I'm clear of the runway, then say I'm clear of runway 15. Use the runway number. It'll be much, much clearer communications that way. And that's my story.
I love it. Well, the only thing I have is actually a request of the audience to every single one of you watching. And yeah, I'm talking to you specifically. If you would do me the great favor of sharing the link to this when we're done, and this will replay whether you're on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, just share that link on your social media sites. Let folks know what you thought about it, because Pat and Kay really need the validation. I'm fine, but they're a little concerned, and it would make Donnie happy too. So if you do that, I'll be really pleased. We will be back on October 12th, Tuesday, October 12th, 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific. And it's possible we may have a little bit of a surprise for you on that one. So definitely tune in. You're going to want to be a part of it. Folks, I had a good time. Signing off for Kay Sunderman in the Media Center of Southern California, Pat Brown in the broadcast headquarters of East Texas, Jamie Beckett from the back of a dumpster in Central Florida. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.